It's Season 3, Episode 4 of the Doctors and Litigation, the L Word podcast. I'm your host, Gita Pensa. Welcome back. I first met today's guest in July 2025 at the American Legal Connections Conference in Atlanta, where we were on a panel together. And by the time that panel was over, I looked at him, radiologist Dr. Nirav Patel, and I said, I've got to interview you for this podcast. Now, for one, it's just a great story. And secondly, his story embodies so much of what I want to convey to you in this series, that we in medicine are very, very, very good at learning. It's only because of our shame and the culture of silence in medicine that we don't learn about litigation, and this is actually to our severe detriment. The two things in my mind that we could do in medical culture to change how doctors show up for this process are openness and education. Now, you've heard me talk about education a lot. You've heard me talk about the LEAP course. But openness is to defeat the shame that does not belong in this arena. And the education is because it's the actual antidote to our fear. And when we actually know what we're doing in the legal arena, not in a Dunning-Kruger top of Mount stupid kind of way, but with true understanding, then we can become tremendous assets to our defense team in a way that I feel could happen more. When physicians or other clinicians are sued, there is a story that most of us just expect to live out, and it doesn't end well. And this story, which we all sort of implicitly understand, this story and our own ignorance is what drives our fear-based behaviors, like overcharting and over-documenting, over-testing, analysis paralysis, because of some magical thinking that we don't understand this, but we need to do these things to avoid that story, which we have been led to believe can only end one way. But this is a story of empowerment, and I want you to hear it to continue to open your eyes to the possibility of thinking differently about what it means to be involved in litigation and learning about it and knowing how to prepare. We're conditioned to believe a certain script about litigation, and a lot of that script centers around victimhood and helplessness. And I'm really hoping this story helps you recognize that in addition to my own story, which took way too long to get on track, there are other scripts. There are other models that we can look to. And instead of victimhood, outrage, and helplessness, we could turn towards agency, strategy, learning, skill building, things that we already are very good at. So listen to the end, come on this wild ride, and learn what's possible when you throw out what you think you know and get yourself a real and thorough education, and you team up with great attorneys. Dr. Patel, thank you so much for coming on the podcast to talk about your experiences in trial.
Thank you for having me.
So you and I were on a panel together at this meeting of an organization called American Legal Connections, which is an organization that really wants to bring everybody in the defense industry together to share ideas and ways forward in this whole thing. And you and I were on a panel talking about the physician experience. And I was someone who comes at it now from this perspective as a coach and someone who educates about this. And you were on as someone who had seemed like it was pretty recent, come off trial. And John Hall, who I'm hoping to have on the podcast later, had been your attorney at trial and had been so impressed with your performance that he decided that he wanted you to be on this panel with me. And I got to say, you had a lot of amazing insight for people who are going through this process, and I wanted them to hear from you directly too. So thank you, thank you, thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, it was 3 weeks after trial that I was in the panel, so everything was really fresh, and I still think I hadn't processed everything that I had gone through.
Well, now that it's been a little longer, we can, reflect back on it. I think for 3 weeks out, you were amazing. And I mean, that's one of the first things that we have to say is that trial leaves a mark. I mean, you did win. We're going to talk about that. But I mean, even after a defense verdict, there was an ER doctor named Greg Henry who used to say that there were no winners in this process. There was just someone who lost and someone who lost more. And that's kind of what it feels like. You come out of it thinking like, what is that? What was that? It's a weird singular human experience.
Absolutely.
So just start off by telling us a little bit about yourself, and then we'll sort of set the stage for what the case was.
Yep. So I'm a radiologist. Specifically, I do emergency and neuroradiology for about 90% of it. And I'm based out of Georgia. And at the time I initially started my career, I was going into the hospital and I was working nights and practicing emergency and neuroradiology. And currently, I'm now a teleradiologist. So I basically read all over the country. And, with emergency and neuroradiology, those are actually high risk fields. So this is something that I've encountered my whole career.
The case that we're talking about now, can you tell us a little bit about it, and how did you first find out you were being sued? Just sort of set the early stage for us.
I was in the early part of my career. It was January 2018. And I had no idea what was going on. I was just carrying on a few years into my career. I hear a knock at the door, and someone delivers me this packet and says, "Well, you've been named in a medical malpractice suit, and here you go." And that's it. So I open it up, I start reading it. I start seeing what it's about. I was like, okay, kind of confused, not fully understanding everything. About an hour after I got a packet, I got a call from the admin in our hospital who said, "You've been named in a suit. We've got a lawyer for you, and have a good day." So it was about a 10-second conversation. The suit alleged that I had missed what is called an aortic dissection, which is a tear in the aorta, and that resulted in a patient's death. Initially, I just felt confused. This is a big thing. How is it possible I missed this? This is something I'm well aware of. This is something I look for all the time. Initial was just confusion and really no one to talk to because the admin was the only person who reached out. So I just kind of sat there saying, all right, let's talk to this lawyer whenever I can.
And when you met the lawyer, what did they say?
So she said, let's take a look at the images and see. So we met, we went through a few background things about my job and who I am. And then we looked at the images and I realized, I said, well, I would read this the same way. Don't understand what they're even talking about. There was no dissection. Basically, it was about a year and a half later. I would have read everything exactly the same way. No dissection. There was an aneurysm, and I would have signed off the report.
Did you know what had happened with the patient in the case? Did you know what was going on?
I knew just from the complaint that the patient was eventually diagnosed with a dissection, and then they had been discharged from the hospital, and then they ended up passing away. The complaint said that there was a dissection and then that it corresponded to some image on our CT scan.
So you're looking at this image number and saying it's not there.
So at the time, they didn't tell me the image number. And that was what ended up coming later. They just said that there is one and it corresponds to the autopsy. And I didn't have the autopsy report. I didn't have an image number, but I just keep scrolling randomly trying to find what are they talking about that apparently correlates with an autopsy.
Okay, so if you can recall, here you are, you've just been named in a lawsuit, you're relatively early in your career, and at first you're like, what did I do? How did I miss this? That's a big thing to miss. Oh my goodness. And I'm sure you've got lots of thoughts about that. Then somebody calls you and says okay, you've been sued, just so you know, we're getting a lawyer by. And you're sitting there by yourself thinking all of these thoughts, and then you're kind of holding on to that until finally you get into your lawyer's office. And then you look at this scan and you say, I don't see it. There is no dissection. What are you thinking? What are you feeling?
The first year or so, I just felt confident actually that, okay, there's nothing here. This must be a mistake. They just named a few of us and I'll eventually get dropped.
Oh, okay. So you were hopeful, okay, someone's going to figure out pretty soon that I had nothing to do with this. And so I'll just wait it out.
So I was sort of just naive to the process. I thought there was, well, a lawyer said this, the expert, there's a mistake. I'll clear it up once I get deposed and everything will be fine. So for the first year and maybe about 15 months, I was just kind of like, okay, this should get dismissed. There's nothing here. So I didn't really start learning about things till after my deposition.
Okay. So let's talk about your deposition. So, I think a lot of people would hope hey, there's no dissection here. I won't even have to get deposed. Someone's going to figure this out. Stepping outside your story for a second, I think this is a really common misconception for people who come into a case thinking wait, I did everything right. Someone somehow is going to point that out soon. And then somebody is going to say, like, oh, Dr. Patel doesn't belong in this. Like, we're just going to let him out of that. And we think it's going to happen fast. And it does not happen like that. And it certainly does not happen fast.
And I had multiple experts. We got two experts who agreed with my read. I did think that, so maybe I won't have to be deposed. And my lawyer said, no, they're going to want sworn testimony before anything gets dismissed. It would be rare to not have sworn testimony before getting dismissed.
That is very true. In radiology, I guess it's pretty plain. Like a plaintiff's expert is saying it is there because someone had to corroborate this plaintiff attorney's claims before you got named. Usually they'll send it to an expert. So someone out there is saying, I see a dissection and this guy missed it.
There was an expert and they have a professor, they have credentials. And so it seems that it's valid. And you said, well, maybe there's something that even though I'm scrolling 100 times, I can't see.
All right. Well, let's get into that. Tell me about deposition.
So the deposition took place about 15 months later. And I ended up doing two. So the first one was in April of 2019. And I didn't really know what to expect. The lawyer just told me a few questions. We did a few mock interviews. Just said, okay, well, that's all you can do. Basically, be honest, listen carefully, just kind of basic stuff. We did a few questions to go through. The thing with the deposition for me, this first one, was I honestly got lucky because it was a younger lawyer who didn't ask a lot of sophisticated questions. But that first deposition, looking back, I was not ready for. I did not have a good understanding of the system.
And you didn't have John as an attorney at that point. You had a different set of attorneys?
Correct, yes. So John wasn't there until the day before trial for me.
We're going to talk about that later, about how nowadays they'll bring in somebody else sometimes. We'll get there. Okay, so tell me, you felt like you weren't prepared. How did you realize that?
I actually didn't realize it until after I started learning about the process, because going into this, I was naive. I just thought, okay, I'll just talk about the experience of how you do radiology and what the images look like, and it'll be fine. And they went through the deposition. They asked sort of your basic questions. They asked your workflow. Then they finally got to the important point, which is this is the image. And I said, oh, well, that's not a big deal. That's just a common motion artifact. That's not a dissection. And I explained it to them. I basically proved it to them. That was it. Because I was a younger lawyer, they didn't ask any questions to trick me. I got lucky in that way, because had they asked, if it had been some more sophisticated with more sophisticated questions, I would have probably been in trouble and I wouldn't have known how to handle those. Once I explained through the deposition that, okay, there's no dissection, here's why it's not, I actually just thought, okay, well, this should easily be dismissed. I know it is. I proved it to you. We have two experts who agree with me. So your expert is wrong. It's kind of 3 versus 1.
That's sweet.
Yeah, it was nice. And it was nice to be naive for a short bit.
We're going to talk about what you did afterwards, but like, when was there a turning point for you as this thing went along where you started to think like, maybe this is not going to happen like I think it should?
Yes. So a couple months later, going into that summer of 2019, now I'm like, it's June, July. I'm seeing these new motions the plaintiff's putting, these new complaints, all this stuff. Why am I in this? And then I start to realize, oh, I'm in this thing. Like, they're not letting me out, and money is the reason. It basically comes down to, I was named with an ER doc. The ER doc's policy was $1 million, and the group was another $1 million for the ER. So that was a total of 2. My policy was $5 million, and the group was 3. So they wanted $8 million from me, and that was what they asked for. And I said, oh, I'm not getting out of this thing at all, because I'm the more valuable one in this. Once I started to realize that, I said, okay. And then there were other things I started to learn. What are optics? What does that even mean? Well, optics is how this is going to look to a jury. Well, to set the stage of this was a minority patient. We were in the Atlanta area, so that is a more diverse population than if you go to other parts of Georgia. The judge was a minority, and the lawyer leading it had actually run for attorney general in Georgia. So like, there was all these other factors. I was like, oh, wait a minute. This lawyer knows that, okay, based on this optics, we can potentially win this case and win millions of dollars. So it really had nothing to do with medicine. And as I started to learn those pieces, I started to really understand that, wait, I don't know anything because this is not about medicine. This is now about how can I win this case? And they have a lot of things going for them, even though the medicine was not correct.
So I want to point something out real quick because people won't see you like you're a brown skinned person.
Yes.
And so when you're talking about optics, it's all how people leverage certain optics. Like we've talked in another podcast early on, we talked about, actually, I think that was a dissection case too, about how politics will get in the way. In that case, the judge had certain political aspirations. There are people who all have very different goals for the case, right? And certainly winning money is a goal for most of the people, for the plaintiff's attorney, but also there is like, is this going to be in the paper? Is this something that I can point to as I'm cracking down on bad docs? I'm cracking down on bad crime. Certainly a story could be told, and it is told in many institutions, and sometimes it is true that someone from an underserved population perhaps does not get the same care as somebody else. And that can be true. These are all narratives that are going to be spun through this whole thing, and you start to see like, oh, these are potentially bad optics.
Exactly. And that's when, for me, it was like a delayed onset of any kind of emotions were because I said, this looks bad. And this is what is going to decide if we go to trial. Because when they even decide, do we want to continue this case or essentially make you settle, is can we win this? And if they think we have a lot of things stacked against us, that was the conversation. Not that, hey, we know you met standard of care and all that, but that's not what our decision is based on.
That's so key. I'm going to keep hammering home this optics point. But when that dawns on you, I will say, because you had not listened to this podcast, I know, before you went into this, but when you start to realize, wait a second, this system isn't based on my care. Like, I know I read this thing right, and all these other doctors say I read this right, and yet that's not enough. I don't know. It causes, for me, it was a lot of disillusionment, betrayal, anger. I had a lot going on in there.
I had brief moments of emotions, and the ones that I would have would last literally an evening. Sometimes I'd be a little bit angry because I was like, this is unfair. It's not even about medicine. How can this possibly be? I had that. At sometimes I'd feel doomed, like literally like, oh wow, I'm gonna have to settle this case. I did everything right. I'm early in my career. What is this? And then sometimes I'd have apathy and I'd say, well, I don't even care. Like, whatever happens, happens. But for me, all those were very brief because my mindset then became, okay, let's step back and let's take a look at this. I'm starting to understand the legal process about optics. I'm understanding this is not as much about medicine as I thought. It is more about money. There's all these other things. Now, how can I approach this?
This is beautiful. When you were talking about this, I was like, this is acceptance. This is one of the things I work with people about. Like, we have to step outside of that emotion. The emotion is normal, but when you can get to a place of acceptance where you're like, okay, this is it. Like, this is it. And now what am I going to do? Now what do I do? This is what, when I heard you talk, I was like, this guy got it really early enough in the process that he was able to steer his own ship. And I want to hear more about what you did. Like, so you thought, okay, I got to figure out what I need to do.
Yeah, this is the legal game. This has been there before me. It'll be here after me. All the lawyers are playing it. Even your own lawyer's playing it. So now I need to step back. How am I going to handle this? Okay, let's remove the emotion out of it. Let's just get that out of it and say, let's approach it. First, I need to learn the legal system in terms of how these processes work. What is everyone's angle? What is everyone's perspective? And then I need to learn what I can do and what I can't control. And so I figured out while doing research, the only thing a physician controls is your testimony. And again, I learned this after my first deposition and said, well, okay, if I can control my testimony, how can I be the best possible witness? What is that going to take? And I realized, okay, I know medicine, the lawyers don't know medicine, but they know law and they know how to ask questions. And they know how to ask questions to make even the smartest doctor seem like they don't know what they're doing. And I said, I need to learn to think like a lawyer. And that's when I basically began my own mini law school for myself. I started reading books on how to be a plaintiff's lawyer. I read books on how to cross-examine, theories on cross-examination, how to cross-examine experts, how to cross-examine doctors. There was a new book that came out in 2009, The Reptile Theory, which is very popular. I read that book. And so I just started reading law books and learning all these strategies. What are they doing? How do they trick patients? And I would Google this and then find a book. How to trick an expert witness. Just learn to cross-examine, learn how they think. Well, if I was in this position, how would I spin this? Okay, you have this. How can I spin this? So then I started to say, well, if I was an expert witness, how would I spin this? And that's really the angle I took, was putting myself in their shoes as if I'm suing myself.
Brilliant. Brilliant. This is what I try to teach people to do. First, they have to deal with the emotional part of it. And you were able to sort of step out of that so early and get to business. But once you're getting to business, one is clarifying what your narrative, and then really understanding what are all the other possible narratives that someone is going to tell about my care. If I were a plaintiff's attorney, where would I say the weak spots were in a way that a jury would understand it? And then how would I ask those questions?
That's exactly it. And I actually would just cross-examine myself. If I'm just sitting, at home, I just start cross-examining myself. And then how would I respond? How would I ask this? How would I respond? Back and forth, back and forth. And you just keep going through every aspect of it. So any new motion that came out, anything they sent out, I took that, how am I going to cross-examine this? And if you start to learn the basics of how they think, they say they want to take a theory and then lead you down this path to get you to agree to things. Well, most of us are going to want to be agreeable, and we tend to agree. But once you understand what they're doing and what they're leading, you can now stop and say, okay, we're not going to go that route. I'm taking control back. But you won't know it unless you know what they're doing and you recognize it. And that's what it takes, is learning how they think and their mindset.
And then the added style of figuring out how to sidestep. And, you're probably going to be videotaped for your deposition, or you're doing this in front of a jury and providing testimony. And how do you do that while appearing and being the most sort of compassionate, wisest version of yourself that does not let other people put words in your mouth?
It's a fine balance. How can you be disagreeable, assertive, yet likable? And that takes practice.
It does take practice. It takes a lot of practice. So when you finally did step into the courtroom, how did you feel? What was that like for you?
It was interesting because, we went through the pandemic, so that delayed things a couple of years. My trial was scheduled for June of 2024, but then the expert couldn't make it and it got delayed for a year. So then I got June 2025. 2 months before, the expert withdrew and would no longer be able to be the expert. So now that left the plaintiff side scrambling to find another expert. And just so everyone knows, you will always find another plaintiff expert. You're paying them, you will always find someone to say what you want them to say. So what was interesting was they named him a couple of months before, but we didn't depose the new plaintiff expert till 2 weeks before trial. And I actually went to that. I flew up to DC with my lawyer and went to that deposition. So here was the interesting thing about this second expert. He had a completely new theory.
Oh.
He said there's no dissection, but there's actually a rupture of the aorta in a different location than the first expert.
No.
And you say, well, how is this even possible? And mind you, the judge knows all of this, right? The judge has reviewed it.
They know that you've lost an expert and they've got a new expert, but he doesn't know the medical theories are ludicrous.
Exactly. They know the medical theory has changed, but they don't know that everything is just made up at this point.
So this is another point that, I made in my own case in the episode where I read my own testimony, and we talk about how by the time I arrived to trial the second time, their entire theory of negligence was totally, totally different. And I thought that was dirty pool. I was like, no, you had a theory and we've disproved it. And so that should be it. And it's not. And that's another thing that could make you quite upset unless you recognize, like, no, this is just how it works. So now you're going to have to adapt.
That's it. And when I was in there for the deposition, it was me, my lawyer, the new expert, and then the plaintiff lawyer.
Let me ask you a question. Did your attorney suggest you go to the deposition? Because I never sat in on any of the plaintiff's experts' depositions. in my own case, but I could see why for a very emotionally balanced, savvy defendant, that would be useful.
She did. Yeah. So, at that point, because I had spent all this time learning and asking her questions.
And she was aware that you were doing that.
Exactly. And the questions, obviously, like from 2018 to 2025, became more sophisticated because I started learning. And, there's also a part that I was practicing more. So you even know more. And then there's a maturity aspect going from your mid 30s to your mid 40s. So all these things really, I think, made her view me differently from like, well, you're just a young doc to like, wait, now you're part of the team. And so I was asking questions and strategies. She, why don't you come up so that way we make sure you can ask questions to me that I need to ask him? Because I was pointing holes to the new theory they emailed us a couple of days before. I said, wait, this is wrong, wrong, wrong. I can prove it.
Amazing.
So that's why we flew up. And that's what happened there was they're going to say what they're going to say. You will never change their mind because they're getting paid to say something. The thing is finding points to damage credibility. And that's where, as a physician, you can help. And that's where I was able to ask this, ask this. We can use this later. I knew I was going to trial. There was no chance I was not going. There was too much money involved.
Mm-hmm.
So now at that point, I no longer wished for this to get thrown out. Everyone knew that the theory was changing, but how can I prepare for trial? And that's obviously just from my experience reading and trying to pretend to be a lawyer.
So the expert deposition is done. You were able to help your attorney get points out in the deposition that you knew would be helpful to you at trial, or to them, really, at trial, to help discredit them when they came back to testify in the courtroom. So tell me, leading up into trial, many of the people I work with are just begging for this thing to get settled. They're just like, I hope it goes away. I hope it goes away. I hope it goes away. Maybe it'll go away. Did you have that feeling?
No, actually quite the opposite. At that point, I wanted to go through it. Now at this point, I had an appreciation for the process. There are a lot of things that are unfair, and all those things are true. But now I said, well, this is almost an experience now. I want to go through this. It had been 7.5 years. I want to go through this. I don't want it to get thrown out. I want to get continued nothing. Like, I want to do this. There was like a mix of like, yeah, you're a little nervous because you don't know anything can happen, but like you're still kind of excited this is going to be the experience. And that was the approach I had going in. Like, okay, let's do this. I'm going to do my best by being prepared and do my best to help my lawyers get prepared.
I love this. This was me at my second trial. So my first trial, I was quaking, shivering. I was in such terrible distress. It was sad when I think back on it. And the evolution between trial 1 and 2 was exactly what you describe, of hitting a point. For me, it was hitting emotional rock bottom and then thinking like, I can't be like this anymore. And learning about tort law came after reaching this place of like, okay, how do I dig myself emotionally out of this hole that I've been in now for all these years? And then thinking like, wait a second, the way I normally deal with something that makes me anxious in medicine is by learning. Why don't I learn? And everything that's happened since then has been because of that decision of like, why don't I actually try to take some agency over my little situation here? I can only do what I can do, but I could probably do more than I've been doing. And that was the beginning of it. And so we have never met, but we kind of came to the same conclusion, you much more rapidly than I did. But that learning the other side's game, especially when we know we did everything that we could possibly have done in a situation, but they're not letting us out of it. It's time for us to take some degree of control. So anyway, I think it's awesome. I applaud it. And it actually made me feel like I could invite my residents to come watch me at trial because I knew I was going to do a good job. Like I was that prepared. I'd worked that hard. And it sounds like you were in a similar boat. Like you knew you were going to testify well.
Absolutely. You always know there could be something you're not prepared for, but I knew that, hey, this is going to go well because I already am anticipating what they're going to say. And then they may get something that I'm not fully prepared for, but I felt comfortable to navigate it because I knew their thought process. I knew the concepts of how lawyers think to make you look bad or to prove their point. And once you know that, you feel comfortable kind of navigating on the fly when necessary. But it takes preparation, and there's no better students than physicians. We are lifelong students. We can learn anything. It's just this is a new area where you have to learn it, but you're capable of learning it.
You're 100% capable of learning it. You just have to put away the anxiety, which anxiety fosters avoidance, the catastrophizing, the ruminating, these all are taking up your bandwidth. And when we learn how to put those somewhere, we'll have to process all of that. That's true. But then do our job, understand the assignment. This is why I'm so passionate about educating about this, because I recognize that, like, man, once we realize, like, hey, there are things I can learn and do better here, we could do this so much better. We could help ourselves and our defense team so much more. And you became sort of this like shining example of that when your attorney was like, hey, we actually need you in the room. Come on, you're going to help us. I love that so much. So tell us, you're heading into trial. All of a sudden, they're like, hey, you've got a new lawyer. What was that about?
So the trial starts Monday. Sunday afternoon, I'm meeting with my lawyer and a new lawyer who's basically the head of this massive 400 plus lawyer firm. I'm like, okay, I'm meeting this big shot now, and he's going to be part of the team and part of the trial. I go into their office to prep on Sunday and I meet him. I was like, okay, this guy is awesome. And he has this big personality. He'll fill up the room. He was a great compliment to my other lawyer who was more savvy strategically, but not going to be filling up the room, but still very brilliant in a different way. And so I actually was great for me because I got to feed off both of them, and the parts of me that were relating to each of them, I was able to utilize. And that actually helped me go through trial because they come things at a different angle. Okay, well, handle this way, do this way, or here's how we're going to approach this witness or that. But being able to relate to him was great.
Oh, go ahead. How did the actual trial experience go? Tell us some stories from there.
So we go in Monday. The thing that was great about John, who was my new lawyer, was he just was excited about going in, and you feed off that energy. So we're going in, they do jury selection, and that takes about 2 or 3 hours. And during that time, everybody's sizing you up, the jury. There's like 60 people sizing you up, and you're trying to size them up. Are you going to help me or not?
Mm-hmm.
After that, it was interesting because that's when the motions started. They did opening statements, but then before that, the motions. And I lost every motion. So everything the plaintiffs wanted, their motions were granted and none of ours were. And so then I'm like, wow, okay, now this is where the politics are coming into play. And, you still feel I'm very comfortable with my care and obviously the new theory, but this is how you could lose.
This is how you could lose, right? And so reminding everybody, you can go in there really prepared to give A+ testimony. You're ultra prepared, but there are so many other things that can determine an outcome that you are not in control over. And yes, they will change the way a case goes. And we have to understand that, I think, before going in. And our lawyers certainly do, and they'll strategize around those things as much as possible. But yeah, it's pretty demoralizing when that was something that came up in my trial as well. I'm in a pretty plaintiff-friendly state. And every time we'd ask for something, they'd be like, no.
It's a little bit disheartening because there were a couple of things. One was we couldn't mention the initial complaint. So we couldn't say, wow, your theory changed 2 weeks ago. They were granted the motion that you couldn't mention the initial complaint. 7.5 years, I was preparing for one theory, and that we no longer could talk about any of that.
Mm-hmm. I know. It's crazy.
Then the judge granted them a motion for a second deposition of me. Now, mind you, trial has started already.
Whoa. Wait, I don't think I knew this. Trial has started already, and then they asked to depose you again?
Exactly. So they asked to depose me again because they realized in that it had been 2 weeks since we deposed the plaintiff. They don't know what I'm going to say. All my initial testimony in April of 2019 was based off the initial theory.
So they asked the judge to depose you again, and the judge says yes?
The judge says yes. And so jury selection has happened. We did the motions. We did opening statements. Monday night, we go to my lawyer's office and I get deposed the second time based on the new theories.
Oh my gosh.
And I was not ready for that mentally. I knew I was going to be testifying. I thought, okay, maybe Wednesday of that week. But no, Monday, okay, go.
And so how did that deposition go?
I was not like ready in terms of like knowing it was going to happen then, but because of all the preparation, I was like, okay, I can handle this.
You're like, yeah, bring it.
And I went through it. They went through their new theory. I said what I was going to say. That gave them an idea of what I was going to say. But I also knew enough at that point that, hey, nothing's changing on this. I'm not giving you a lot. I'm giving you your one word answers because I'll have a chance to explain to the jury in a couple of days.
Absolutely.
So that was like part of where I had learned, where I felt comfortable. Like, okay, I'm not even going to try to explain myself to you. Nothing's changing.
And that was very strategic, right? Because sometimes now, there's this whole idea now that the original deposition is trial. Like there's a book called that a plaintiff attorney wrote. There's this, movement now, which I really hope continues, that we have to get our defendants more ready for deposition. Like they need to understand that, like they usually say, like, you can only lose, so don't talk, which is, we should be playing to win, which is what the plaintiff's attorneys do. So this is so interesting because strategically you might have done something different at that first deposition. But now, they've only got 2 days, and even if this is videotape, that's not enough time for them to, like, pull stuff out and play it during the trial to make me look bad or anything. It's just like, "No, I'm just gonna hold my cards pretty tight." And it sounds like that was a really wise thing to do.
Well, it's exactly what it is deposition, but it is going to be used at trial. And they will take anything they can to try to impeach you at trial and say, well, you said this in your deposition. Now you're saying this to make you look bad. And so and obviously I had figured that out by that point. And so I knew whatever I say, I'm going to make sure I'm consistent and I'm not giving you a lot to go off of. So you can't even say, well, now you're changing. I didn't give you anything. And, that was right for that moment and at that time.
Okay, the deposition is done, and now trial has also
The
started.
deposition's done. That'd have been a 16-hour day, and I lived an hour away. So it's about get home around 10 o'clock.
Oh my gosh, you poor thing.
I'd be back at the lawyer's office by 6:30.
Wow. Okay. I mean, doctors pull this kind of stuff off in medicine all the time. I think a lot of people would be sort of overwrought in this situation, but you really kept your head together and you were really into the strategy of it at this point. So tell me what happened from then.
So from then on, the second day happened where the plaintiffs call me as an expert. Now, they're basically calling me. Now, this is not cross-examination. This is them just calling me up. Now, this is one lawyer basically trying to dig deeper for my deposition. Now, I had heard their plaintiff expert go right before me. So what I did was I took this as an opportunity to directly attack everything he said, because I knew at this point, this is my first impression in front of the jury. They heard him. Now I'm going exactly. So basically, everything the lawyer said, I would answer. You answer yes or no, but I immediately just started just talking and explaining everything of why the other guy was wrong and why I did what I did and everything they took. And I could tell the lawyer was not ready for that because I had not been that way the night before. And then they also didn't understand the science the way we understand, but I'm able to explain it to them. And so I think that was actually a really big kind of a point for me in the trial, that the initial impression was good because of that.
And how, as you were testifying, were you like connecting with the jury and feeling like, are they understanding me? Like, let's make sure that everybody's coming along. Tell us a little bit about that. Like, how do you make sure that you are getting your stuff across to the jury and they're like, oh, I get it. This guy really knows what he's doing. And whatever the other expert said doesn't make sense.
They're people. They are regular people. They're just like our patients. I talk to them exactly that way, as if I'm talking to a patient and explaining a pathology to them. You look at the jury. I looked at each of them. There were 14 because there's 2 alternates. I just went down the road, continue to just look to them and talk to them. None of them are medical. We know their backgrounds based on the initial jury selection. But, they're educated. They know and they can understand these things, right? So just because you're not medical doesn't mean you can't understand them. So you just talk as if you're explaining to a patient. And then that's all I did. And I just connected and talked to them, explained them, and over just made my points on that. They're regular people. They're humans. You just make eye contact with them and talk to them. Don't be afraid of them. And you started to see, okay, initially, like, who is this guy? I was on the stand initially for a couple of hours. They just start nodding their heads. Okay, yeah, you start connecting. So there's a few you're connecting with.
That's exactly right.
That would be just talk to them like you talk to your patients.
When you see them nodding, then you've got them understanding you and you're connecting to them. That is a very good feeling.
It's reassuring to you. Okay, I'm on the right path. I'm saying the right things to make you understand. These are hard concepts, just like a random image we're showing. If you have no training, the image doesn't mean anything. But then once you start putting the concepts into there and they're capable of understanding. And I think that's really the key is they're capable. You just got to do the right job of explaining it to them.
So then what happened?
So that was the first day. And, I just went politely aggressive. And when I got off the stand, my lawyers, and I'm like, okay, great job, great job. Okay. So then my strategy of being aggressive was okay. You still are not sure because that was my first trial. So then, that day concludes and they actually rest on the second day because they had their plaintiff expert. They put a couple of family members and me. That was their theory. So the next day, we're getting ready to go. So we go back to the lawyer's office. Okay, how are we going to do this the next day? So what was interesting was I had made a PowerPoint before that I wanted to present when my lawyer, John, was going to, ask me questions. So the PowerPoint was long. What was interesting was the two lawyers, there was John and there was Beth. Beth was like, well, that's not really how we do this. You can't present 100 slides at trial. And I was like, well, I'm a radiologist. This is what I do. I prove points by showing images. I'm not a lawyer. I don't argue the way you do because you're just arguing words and words. Words are he said, she said, but this is what I do. I'm like, well, I don't know. We're just going to show a couple of pictures and that's it. I was like, I don't like it. So that was kind of going into it. I thought, I'm not going to be able to show my PowerPoint, which is going to prove them and they can understand this. Then what was interesting was on the second day of trial, the plaintiff's expert was testifying. First, the plaintiff's lawyer asking questions so he can set the stage for his theory. Then the next chance after that is John, who's my lawyer, gets a chance to cross-examine him. So while the plaintiff's expert was on the stand, John asked me, what do you want me to ask him before I cross-examine him? And I was writing questions down saying, this is what I want you to ask. This is what I want you to ask. Then before John was going up, we had a 5-minute break. And John's like, well, I need you to explain to me some of this stuff of why you want me to ask him. So I pulled out this PowerPoint.
The one they didn't want to use.
The one that my lawyer said, no, we don't do this. We don't use it. And I was like, did I waste my time? Yeah, you kind of wasted all your time. Okay, whatever. I still had the PowerPoint. I was like, John, and I did explaining to him using my PowerPoint. This. And he's like, got it. I understand it. So like in less than 5 minutes, he understood everything. And he understood why I was telling him to ask it, right? And that combined with his legal knowledge, now he's in a power position. He's like, I got this. And then he said, okay, is this your PowerPoint? I say, yes. Okay, we're going to use that. We'll talk about it, later. So when he went up, he was ready to go because he had been taught by that PowerPoint. And he was able to ask questions, the ones that I wanted, and he was able to ask them in a way that the jury could understand because he understood the concepts. So that was a great kind of win for day 2 when we had the plaintiff expert to try to make him look bad.
I love this collaboration. I love the fact that you are able to teach John and John is able to run with it. Fabulous. I mean, I think this is how every case should be. Like every doctor should be really capable of helping their defense team, but they have to understand the strategy and how everything works first.
Absolutely. And when I told him, I said, look, we know he's not going to change his theory. So even though we're going to say, look, in this image, you're wrong, you're wrong, you're wrong, he's not going to change. He's getting paid a lot of money to say what he needs to say. But we can damage credibility. And that's where thinking like a lawyer helps because you know the medicine as a physician. And if you can think like a lawyer, I would tell him, like, look, this is going to damage the credibility. This is going to damage it. This is going to damage it. And we can prove it wrong. And I felt a lot of confidence because he made it fun. And before he goes up, I said, good luck. He goes fastball down the middle. And I was like, okay, he's got this. He's got 30, 40 years of experience and he gives me like a smile and a wink. I was like, he's got this. And so then that made me feel confident.
Oh my God, I love it.
I don't control anything else, right? You rely on your lawyers. I control my testimony and how I can help in that way, but I need him to perform. And he can perform because we work together. So, you kind of take the knowledge we both have and this collaboration, and he made it happen.
Fastball down the middle.
I love it. That's one of my favorite moments. It's so great because it's a tense moment. He's about to cross-examine them, but it kind of made it like just a brief moment where you can relax, right? Your muscles just relax. Okay, let's reset and get going.
Amazing.
We fast forward through, he did that testimony and that obviously went well because he knew exactly what to ask. So then day 2 ended, the plaintiff's rest, and it's my turn. And now we're using this presentation. We go back to the lawyer's office that night. We talk about what we're going to do the next day. what the general path is going to be, because on direct examination, it's your lawyer asking you questions. This is your chance to really explain everything in detail. This is the chance for the jury to hear you. So we do a lot of prep. We do prep that evening for a couple of hours, come in the morning at 6 a.m., do a little more, edit the PowerPoint. And the thing that's important about collaboration is I'm a radiologist. My PowerPoint is from a radiology perspective, but he has the perspective of how is this going to be perceived? So some things he might want to edit or remove or say, no, let's add this or this. And so that's where it really matters. Like, this is going to be perceived this way, good or bad. Let's add it or remove it. And that helped me because I know how to talk to residents or other radiologists, but how is it going to be perceived by a courtroom is different.
Okay. So how did they use it?
We did it just like a PowerPoint. I've done lectures millions of times. That's exactly how we did it.
They let you just give a lecture?
Yeah. So what's interesting was the plaintiff's lawyers, there were 3 of them. There was one main one. They kept objecting because like, we've never seen anything like this. Like, you can't give a lecture.
The judge allowed it?
The judge allowed it because what was interesting was that first day, the judge gave them everything. I was like, this is just awful. You could see a shift as things just started going more our way. The judge was granting more objections, more motions. And so there were things kind of shifting. And that was kind of cool to see that even though there were a lot of things that were against me, the judge was shifting. We were kind of getting things our way. So the judge said, yeah, because this is just to demonstrate it. This is not an exhibit. We're just demonstrating to proven examples. Okay, fine. And so I didn't sit there and give a 45-minute lecture, but in essence, we got around it the legal way, which is he'll ask an open-ended question and you just go through the PowerPoints. You go through a few slides and then he asks another, well, what about this? Okay, let's talk about this. And basically what I did was I made it in about 5 parts, and every single point that the plaintiff's expert had, I proved why it's wrong using imaging. I basically gave a basic radiology lecture. This is the concept of radiology. On this image, we can see this. I just went point by point, and everything that the expert had said before, I just took down. That was my goal. And I could prove it all with imaging.
Wow.
That went well. That went as we expected and as it should. The main thing there is talking to them, making sure the jury understands. It's really a personality contest. Do they like you? Are you likable? And that's what I kept, when I was lecturing them, trying to explain to them, that was what I just kept. Am I getting the nods I need? Does this need to be reiterated? Do I need to restate this? And they will tell you based on their facial expressions if they're confused or if they got it. That goes well. Now it's time for their cross-examination. So now this is the 3rd time I'm testifying in 3 days because I had the deposition Monday, they called me up Tuesday, and here I go.
Wow.
This was about 2 or 3 hours, and it's a different lawyer this time. Another lawyer wants to take a chance, right? They go and they just start bringing all kinds of wild theories. Because at this point, they realize, okay, this theory that we had, it's not working well. They tried a little bit, but then they just started trying to bring all new things in. Things that no one had said before. But basically what they're trying to do is damage your credibility and trip you up. They even brought things up for my first deposition. Well, you said this in 2019. How are we even talking about that? That's a completely different theory. They're doing everything they can to trip you up. They're doing everything they can to get a rise out of you, to make you look bad. It all became about damaging you and your credibility.
And you knew this, though. You recognized it every play.
Some of this stuff was so ridiculous. At one point, the lawyer was laying on the ground trying to talk about how CTs are performed. There were all kinds of theatrics they were doing. But again, it's just to get a rise out. You just keep going. And if you keep someone on stand for 3-4 hours, eventually they wear down and maybe they make themselves look bad. But I felt so prepared. I knew what they were doing. I actually started to kind of just have fun with it.
Well, it reeks of desperation at this point, and you know it.
So I'm going to make sure I don't do anything crazy. I'm just going to stay calm, keep talking to the jury because they'll try to distract you away. They don't want you to look at the jury because then you look worse. I kept making sure, look at the jury. So I'd always talk to the jury just to keep that connection.
Meanwhile, he's lying on the floor, pretending to have a CAT scan.
Lying on the floor and the theatrics were pretty interesting. That after, I don't even know, 2-3 hours, the judge stepped in actually and said, well, you're allowed your day in court, but at some point enough is enough.
Wow.
And so, at that point I knew, I was like, okay, well, this is great for me because the judge recognizes this, but this is also great because it sends a signal to the jury.
It sure does. Sure does.
That's kind of enough. Like, this is going crazy. But again, I felt confident with the performance, but you don't know what a jury is going to do.
Exactly. So what did they do?
So, well, then we go continuing on. After that, they do the closing statements where they trash you, right? And so then you just wait and wait and wait. And they probably took about an hour and they came back and we got a defense verdict. What was interesting was I wasn't happy. I was just like, okay. And you think you'd be like really happy after it'd been almost 8 years. You're relieved that you won because you know you did everything correctly. But it kind of goes back to what you had mentioned earlier. It's a lose-lose. I put in a lot of time and effort into this, and I'm just going to go back and get a shift that weekend. That's it. In that way, it's a relief that you're done, but then I don't know. You're just like, I still lost all that time and effort, and it's not really the end because they're going to appeal in a month, in which they did.
They did.
Well, the first they ask for a new trial, and then that typically gets denied. Then they do an appeal. I'm still not out of the process, even though I won. And that's the kind of interesting thing. It still drags on. Is there a chance? Yes. You're not completely done yet.
I mean, it happens. It does happen. I'm surprised. Well, I was surprised when they appealed my verdict also because I thought we did a pretty good job. Even that first time around, even though I was a mess and I don't really remember it, but I feel like we sort of had a resounding win. So they appeal to people, but it happens. It's standard. And it may be that they're just trying to yank your chain until someone throws some money at them and says like, all right, like stop, go away. Or maybe you won't do that.
So that's exactly the strategy, right? So what the hope is, we offer money to be done with it. They were asking for like 8 million. Maybe they say, oh, you guys offer us $1 million, we'll be done with this. They're trying to get any money possible.
And how do you feel about that?
It's part of the process. We're ready for whatever happens. Of course, you don't want to go to a new trial and get it appealed, because if they have a new trial, they'll probably have a new theory. And that would be all over again. But I don't lose sleep over it because I understand this is the process. I'm not willing to say, hey, give them any money. But again, that decision is not really mine. But luckily, the lawyers and the insurance company are on board. And we'll just kind of wait out and see if there's anything with the appeals. Lawyers feel good that, hey, everything was fair. The appeals, you can make them anything to write an appeal. And that's what they did. And we'll see what happens. So it's just kind of a waiting game until you hear from your lawyer. What's interesting is those lawyers know there was no case, but they have to try it. That's their duty. And I think that's important for everyone to know. Even those lawyers know, but that's part of it.
Well, they don't have to. I'm going to say that. Like, they don't have to. I mean, they could dismiss it. They could go back to their plaintiff and say, like, we really don't have a case. Like, they could recognize that. But it's tough when they're looking at an $8 million purse.
And of course, they get half. So if there's an $8 million settlement or a verdict, then they get $4 million. So of course, money matters for them too. There's so many other things behind the scenes that affect whether they go to trial or not.
Well, I wish you luck on your appeal. However it goes, I know that you're going to be ready. Let's bring it home. And I want to know if you could talk to, there are physicians who are listening to this who have just been served. What is one piece of advice you would give them right now as someone who has been through this and done it as well as a doctor could possibly do?
Aside from the legal stuff we talked about, I would say this is not the end of the world. That's what I would tell you, is that it's going to feel like the end of the world. You may question your confidence, even if you did everything right, or maybe you didn't. It's not the end of the world. You're going to get through this, but you're going to take it step by step. Don't look ahead and say, well, what if I get a $75 million judgment against me? Take it step by step. It's not the end of the world, but control what you can control, and that's your testimony. Learn the legal process, learn how plaintiffs' lawyers think, and that's what you can set yourself up for. Everything else is out of your control, and you can't do anything about it.
Dr. Patel, thank you so much for coming and sharing your story. I think it's really going to be helpful to a lot of people to have a really valuable perspective of, you know what? We can learn this. We can roll up our sleeves, get to work, and learn how to help ourselves and to be our defense attorney's best ally. So I appreciate it again, and I look forward to hearing about the complete resolution of your case in the future.
Thank you for having me.
We did this whole thing, and you didn't tell them what happened at the very end. I forgot to ask you. You win, everything's over, and then what happens?
The plaintiff's lawyer, the one who was on the ground and going at me for 3 hours, comes over and asks us if I would work with her as an expert witness in the future.
But that just tells you how good you are on the stand. And she is driving an appeal. still.
Yes.
But I think that's really telling.
I told her when she stops suing me, then I can work with her.
Oh my God. Thank you again, Dr. Nirav Patel, for bravely sharing your amazing story and showing us how it's done. And if you are inspired by this and want to jumpstart your legal education, sign up for the Litigation, Education, and Performance course, the LEAP course. The link is in the show notes. Now, next month, we are going to hear from Dr. Patel's attorney, fastball down the middle trial attorney extraordinaire, John E. Hall Jr. You don't want to miss it.